Good evening, good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. Gives me pleasure, it's a privilege to be part of this wonderful audience who are concerned about the plight of our rivers. This event is also being streamed live on Facebook. So for those folks who want to take that option, it's there. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to set the context for the topic of discussion on science, data, and advocacy for capture fisheries in rivers, and then followed by the panel discussion that will be moderated by Manu Modkar. So I'm Jagdish Krishnaswamy. I'm the Dean at the Indian Institute for Human Settlements School of Environmental Sustainability. And on behalf of both the Indian Institute for Human Settlements and ATRI, we are both part of the India Rivers Forum. So it gives me great pleasure to be with all of you. So in terms of why we need to have data, advocacy, and science in relation to free-flowing rivers, freshwater ecosystems, I'll just give you a global context. Here are something that all of you are familiar with, the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 of them. And I would like to draw your attention to, for example, the Sustainable Development Goal number 14, which is life below water. Now that is exclusively for marine ecosystems. So it's not about freshwater ecosystems at all. Goal 50 is life on land. So it's terrestrial ecosystems. And there is some nesting of freshwater ecosystems under that. If you look at goal number 6, clean water and sanitation, that's at the goal level. And under that, there are targets related to, for example, 6.6 on freshwater ecosystems. So free-flowing rivers do not merit a sustainable development goal equivalent to marine ecosystems or terrestrial ecosystems. So even at the level of this international commitments that we have made, normative goals that we have set for the whole all the countries and all human communities around the world, we have missed out on having freshwater ecosystems explicitly defined as a goal. And so that in some sense it relates to the marginalization of free-flowing rivers and freshwater ecosystems and floodplains and so on in terms of the trade-offs and synergies that the management of those systems have with some of the other sustainable development goals. So this is just to mention that. So here are some of the topics that we hope that will emerge out of this evening's deliberations. We want to see what is the status of the maps or spatially explicit data on river ecosystems, fish communities, and fishers across the country. Do we have anything resembling that? What is the current state of scholarship and capacity for research and scholarship in river ecology and freshwater fish biology? What has been happening to the composition of fish communities across our rivers? How have they been transformed by river regulation and their inability to freely flood and pollution and so on? And what has happened to native fish communities because of invasive fishes being introduced into our rivers? And how has this impacted fishers? Does it provide opportunities, or is it going to be a threat to sustainable fisheries, capture fisheries in the future? And in order to advocate for river conservation and free-flowing rivers, do we have the data and knowledge required to be effective? And what are the current mechanisms of data collection and the institutions that are responsible for this? And what spatial and temporal scales in terms of capture fisheries and in rivers are actually being covered by whatever we have? And finally, how do we make this whole issue of data science and advocacy more rigorous, participatory, and also have information that can be retrieved by a variety of stakeholders, especially fishing communities whose future is at stake, and so that we can move towards more sustainable management of our rivers and revive capture fisheries. So these are some of the topics we hope that will emerge. So I'm just going to give you a brief overview. So it's not that we have not had a history of inquiry into fisheries and rivers. So here is a paper from 1941, and this is actually more recent. There was work done in the late 19th century as well, Francis Day and others. So inquiry into capture fisheries has, I'm talking about the more modern era, is, and I'm not going into anything more than 150 years ago, but it has a history, and you can see that, for example, this paper deals with the effect of the Mettur Dam on capture fisheries, and it even discusses many other issues. For example, the inefficacy of fishing ladders and why they are not fish ladders and why they are not suitable for conditions here. And this is a topic that we are still debating and talking about. So just to make the point that we actually have a good history of generating knowledge on fisheries and in scientific work as well. So just to bring it more up to date, with the help of my colleague Susan Verghese at ATRI, we looked at, say, the last 5 years, except for one report from 2012. Other than that, we looked at the whatever has been published in for example, in the last from five to 6 years, from 2015 onwards. We looked at all the papers that we could find in Google Scholar, in ResearchGate, and Google as well, and we got this 36 papers in all that were dealing exclusively with capture fisheries in rivers. And remember that there's a lot more literature available on aquaculture, on lakes and reservoirs, and many other things. But we try to find out the ones that are dealing with capture fisheries in rivers in one form or the other. And we can see that a lot has been published by government institutions such as CIFRI. There are some papers and reports coming from civil society organizations, as well as a good number, equal in number to government research institutes coming from the universities. So whether this is adequate to, in terms of given the magnitude of the problem and given how rich our native fish biodiversity is, and the variety, diversity of fisher folk communities, the gear they use, the context in which fishing is happening, and the different biomes in which our rivers are located, ecoclimates in which they're located, suggest that maybe this is not sufficient. We definitely need a lot more. So we did a word cloud on the titles, the keywords, and you can see this is what we got. You can see a variety of topics, very important topics being covered. And as you know, in the word cloud, the larger the size of the letters, the more often it appears in the set of literature looked at. And so we can see that, yes, there is a healthy diversity in terms of the topics that have been covered, including one or two even on things like climate change effects and all, even on hydropower effects, hydropower dam effects. You have, restoration as well, indices. You have some things on food chains as well, vulnerability, poaching. A lot of it is there. Specific rivers being covered, for example, the Yamuna, exotic fishes. So there is quite a bit of topics being covered. So we definitely need a lot more of this. So just to say that some of the gaps that seem to have emerged from our assessment is, this is just a photograph of taken many years ago on the Ganga and Vikramshila Dolphin Sanctuary when I was working with Nachiket. And so one is the extent of the status of fishing communities across the country the gear that they're using, the context in which, what has happened to the resources on which they're dependent. We don't have a good quantitative assessment of this. We do have some really good local studies, sometimes even regional assessments are available, but a database across or a status report of capture fisheries in rivers across the country is still, it still awaits us. Another knowledge gap that I have identified is that there's not enough being done on the relationship between capture fisheries in rivers and the overall productivity of the floodplains, including the oxbow lakes, the tributaries, the flooding regimes, because we do know of the flood pulse concept and how much of the productivity of capture fisheries in floodplain rivers actually emerges from these interactions between the main river and the floodplains and the floodplain wetlands, which happens because of these regular floods or intermittent floods. And so rather than nutrients and the productivity coming from upstream to downstream, it's actually generated within the floodplain because of the exchange of nutrients, biota, sediments, between these different systems within the floodplain. So there's not enough known about this, I think, in terms of the scholarship, as much as we would like to have. So just to show you how dynamic our floodplain systems are, whether it's the Brahmaputra river system, and this one is, of course, the Ganga in Bihar, in the Vikramshila Dolphin Sanctuary, and you can see how the movements across space and time. Invasive species are already in our different rivers, and these are some examples that Shishir and other students and colleagues of mine have put together. And I'm sure that more rivers have been invaded by many of these species. What is the population status of these invasive species? What are they doing to native fishes? And how are our fishers responding to these alien fishes? Is something, again, an area of inquiry that merits much more investment in time, effort, and resources. Also, our rivers and floodplains and valleys are linked systems in terms of having riparian vegetation that interacts with the river ecologically, hydrologically, and in terms of nutrient, sediment, and many other transfers. So we really need to have more studies that are holistic in terms of looking at riparian vegetation and its role in the overall health of the river ecosystem, and with direct and indirect impacts on the health of the fisheries themselves. The other knowledge gap that we have seen, based on the papers that we've assessed, that we still need to have a lot more inquiry into what is likely to happen to our rivers and the fisheries that they sustain, because of the huge transformations that are being planned. For example, the river interlinking project. We know there are a couple of studies which suggest that the sediment flow into the Sundarbans area will be reduced in the delta, will be reduced by almost up to 40 to 50% if all the interlinking is done. There are other sediment mobilization and sediment outputs that will be cut off. There are lots of impacts to worry about, and there's simply not enough evidence and knowledge and scholarship, I think, that to look at these transformations in a major way, because they have implications for the entire river ecosystem as well as for the future of capture fisheries. The other type of modification that's ongoing is, of course, the waterways that are being planned on many rivers in the country. Again, the impact of these on capture fisheries is something, as well as both interlinking as well as waterways can also differentially impact native species versus invasive species. So that's something that is a knowledge gap that we need to address. We also don't have enough scholarship on the role that free-flowing rivers play in the productivity of our estuarine and coastal systems. So there's a linkage between the productivity of our riverine fisheries and the nutrient segments and fresh water that they provide into our coastal ecosystems. So even though this session is all about freshwater river ecosystems, the connection between the two in terms of setting the context for conservation of rivers needs to be looked at. And this is just to show that wherever free-flowing rivers are, they empty out into the sea, you can see the high productivity in terms of chlorophyll A, and therefore the health of our estuarine and near coastal ecosystems and those fishes, marine fishes, even though they are not the focus of our topic of our discussion today, their health is also linked to the health of our rivers. The other area of inquiry that needs to be looked at is the connectivity, ecological connectivity between estuaries and freshwater river ecosystems. So you can see this example. This is the work done by Shivona, and many of the estuarine fishes, as in the dry season, as the salinity ingresses upstream into the river, and the Agnashni is one of the few undammed rivers in the Western Ghats, you can see that many of the more salt-loving estuarine fish species start moving up into the river. So this dynamics, seasonal dynamics of freshwater versus estuarine fishes, how they use the habitat and how it leads to the overall productivity of the fisheries, and how this is being impacted by hydropower dams. For example, in the Sharavati, we don't see this type of movement as much as we would like to see because of freshwater pulses coming from the hydropower dam. So this is another area, knowledge gap that we need to address. We do have some things emerging. So this is the Rimban River belonging to which is managed by the people of Lapalang village in Meghalaya, and these are the local communities which have established a fish conservation zone. And so on the left, you can see Dr. Bashida. She's a lecturer in St. Anthony's College in Meghalaya, but she's also a member of this community, the Khasi community. She belongs to this village, and as a fish biologist, she has been working with the community in her own village, and they have actually set up a fish conservation zone. And so they're just had a recent sampling to see how well the fish conservation zone has fared in terms of having restrictions on fishing, on washing, and other uses of water of the river for 9 months. And now they're reporting very good results in terms of the conservation. And this community has also empowered itself in terms of being able to measure the hydrology of the river and not depend on any other agency in terms of information about the state of their own river. So this is something that this type of knowledge which empowers communities, again, is something that we need to have much more of throughout the country. Because, relying on government agencies and for research institutes and universities always for providing information for such a large country and so diverse set of sites and rivers is simply not possible. So we need empowered communities and citizen scientists to be part of the data collection and knowledge system. So what are the gaps and way forward overall that in my assessment is that we still need to have much more of a combined socioeconomic, hydrological and ecological atlas of India's rivers, riverine fisheries and fishers. So we don't have that. We need to have we have done a lot in terms of conservation planning for terrestrial ecosystems, for terrestrial fauna. We don't have the equivalent for rivers and riverine fishes and fishers. So we need to have this combined atlas in some sense. This can only happen through partnerships and networks across stakeholders, which puts fishers at the center, and of course has the participation of citizen scientists, government institutes, as well as civil society organizations. We need much more partnerships between empowered fishing communities and researchers. They need to collaborate with each other and co-generate knowledge. We definitely need evidence and knowledge-based assessment of these large-scale transformations like river linking and waterways. How are they going to impact embankments? How are they impacting our river systems? We need much more of that. So what would be the design of a sustainable capture fishery in terms of the socio-ecological system in which it operates. How do you set certain limits and seasons, and for riverine fisheries specifically, just like we have for some marine fisheries in the country? Can we have something which is river specific and season specific, and that would help with actually achieving truly sustainable fisheries? Invasive species management, they are here to stay, looks like. How do we manage them, regulate them, and can native fishes cope with them, and also how do fishers respond to invasive species? Is this an opportunity for adaptation, or is this something that's a threat to native fishes and therefore fishers? And a couple of other things that we definitely need much more scholarship on is alternative ways of managing our reservoirs and barrages to help revive capture fisheries. We definitely need to look at this issue, because we certainly see that they have been part of the problem for many decades, but can we make them part of the solution in terms of managing both freshwater ecological flows as well as sediment management to help revive degraded capture fisheries downstream? And of course, the big elephant in the room, climate change. How are fishers and fisheries going to respond to climate change? What are the options for adaptation, and how can we help the communities cope with this? Is some of the things that emerged as gaps from our assessment of the literature and the knowledge available in the country. So I'm going to end here, and I'm going to hand over to Manu Modgil. He's an independent journalist. He's worked on river health in Rajasthan. He's also been part of the India Rivers Forum before. He has been covering many topics related to agriculture, environment, and governance. And it's my pleasure and privilege to invite Manu Modgil to moderate the rest of the session. So I'm going to stop sharing now, just to show that if we really need to move ahead, this is the sort of a wish list of linkages and partnerships that we need to have between scientists and other folks. So over to you, Manu.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Jagdish.
I will now, I think I should stop sharing.
Yes, sir. Thanks, sir. That was a very detailed introduction and kind of sets the tone for the session. And now the panelists can take over and explore the different threads that come in from your presentation. We have quite a diverse set of panelists today. Experts coming in from government sector, from advocacy background, from research and academics. And we also plan to kind of cover different regions of the country, from the Northeast to Western Ghats to Gangetic Plains. So it's going to be definitely an interesting session. To start with, I would just point out that each panelist would have 10 minutes to present, and then we will go into question answers. Any of the participants, if you have any questions, you can put them in the Q&A box. Again, to remind that this session is also getting live streamed on Facebook, and the video will be available later on YouTube for later watching. So we have Dr. Nachiket Kelkar as a panelist, who is from Wildlife Conservation Trust. And he has studied ecological and social dimensions of riverine biodiversity in Gangetic Plains. So I would request...
You are not audible. Little louder. I'm Dr. Das, A.K. Das from ICAR, Central Inland Fisheries Research Institute, Barakpur, Kolkata.
Welcome, sir. Welcome.
Yeah. Kindly louder. Yeah, please.
Yeah. Okay. So we have on the panel Dr. Nachiket Kelkar, who is from Wildlife Conservation Trust, and he has studied ecological and social dimensions of riverine biodiversity in Gangetic Plains. And we don't have right now present, he is not with us right now, but his presentation with us. And I would request Siddharth Agarwal to please play the video of his presentation. And anyone who would have a question for him, they can maybe email him the questions. The email ID will be visible on the PPT.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today, I'm going to speak on capture fisheries in India's rivers and the knowledge gaps and policy gaps that exist in this important issue of how to manage capture fisheries. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers of the India Rivers Week and today's session lead, Dr. Jagdish Krishnaswamy, for this opportunity. The policy image of capture fisheries is typically one of a very informal or unorganized sector that is mainly important for livelihoods of poor people, does not fetch much revenue to the state. It is something that's out there. You don't really consider, people don't really consider it as important for policy intervention as they do for freshwater aquaculture or other culture-based or stock fisheries. So with this sort of marginalized image of capture fisheries, there are many gaps that are worth discussing in today's forum. This neglect is not new. In fact, if we go nearly 100 years back, we can see this quote from Major T. Southwell, the superintendent of fisheries at that time. Throughout India, agriculture has been developed at the expense of the inland fisheries without even a passing thought for their well-being. And in this country, it is hardly possible for these two industries to develop side by side. And I think that explains most of the gaps that we currently see in riverine capture fisheries in particular. There are several socio-economic data gaps. For instance, there is still no clear figure of the number of active riverine fishers who are dependent on river floodplain ecosystems for their livelihoods. We don't know enough about the level and the nature of seasonal dependency of these fishers on capture fisheries. Nor do we know much about the extent of people having permanently or temporarily exited capture fisheries in search of other occupations or professions. In terms of statistics, river fish remain hidden because inland aggregate yields are often based on lump data. These data come from culture-based fisheries or stock fisheries which dominate these statistics, like for example from reservoirs or from estuaries also, or from lakes, wetlands, ponds and tanks. Whereas what is the contribution of rivers often remains hidden and unacknowledged. Similarly, we don't know enough about what are the relationships between fishing effort divided by gear type and the catches that different gear types help fishers to obtain those catches. This is important for two reasons. One is that if we don't have a good idea of fishing effort in place, it is difficult to identify management interventions. Secondly, it's not always a linear relationship that the more the effort, the more the catch. There can be other complex forms of non-linear dependencies between the two, which also have important implications for capture fisheries management. Recently, this has been a very nice attempt by authors who published this FAO paper, which tries to disaggregate yield estimates for different river basins based on several assumptions and corrections. And it's an important step in terms of getting at slightly more nuanced estimates of capture fisheries contributions in these different river basins. The socioeconomic data gaps are also related to tenure systems. What are the access, harvesting and management rights that are in place, which enable people to benefit from livelihoods dependent on capture fisheries? We don't know enough. Further, many state level policies, as you know, inland capture fisheries are a state subject, and many of these policies recognize traditional fishing castes as by default having access rights. However, this is also not always the case, and there is scope to investigate livelihood linkages as well. Often capture fisheries happen to be managed or governed through very informal or customary rights or arrangements or easements that are provided by landholders to capture fishers. And in terms of state level management, we have a whole cooperative machinery, but we still don't know what exactly its impact or effectiveness has been in terms of managing captured fisheries. So that again is an important gap. Recently, we have tried to put together a review of governance and tenure systems in inland capture fisheries and aquaculture systems across India. And it just makes a very broad effort to look at what are the different ways in which different capture fisheries and culture-based fisheries are managed in our country. And it should be out soon. This leads us also to many institutional gaps, which directly are linked to policy gaps as well. For example, there has throughout history, throughout the colonial period, there has been land-based control of fishing rights, which should actually be more like a control of rights to the water. It has been entirely controlled by land owners, rent extraction by private freehold tenure holders, and so on. Over time, there has been also a very poor reach of state and cooperative institutions in matters related to river fisheries. This has been because aquaculture has dominated the imagination of fisheries managers across the country for several important reasons, of course. But what this has led to is that the limited reach of these institutions in to capture fishers and those communities have also weakened community-based institutions to manage fishery resources as common property resources. This has probably led to a space for an emerging, what I call a criminal political economy, as it was framed by Barbara Harris White. And we can think of this as similar to the sand mining economy, for example, which we know that across India, it is related to control of criminal or antisocial elements. And something similar seems to be happening with riverine capture fisheries as well, especially in the Gangetic Plains. All these factors together have led to distress migration, and there has been a new wave of caste politics related to the upliftment of fishing castes that is sort of sweeping many regions. This has led to shifting identities. So what somebody who would be considered a fisherman earlier is now either relegated to the category of an urban slum dweller or a migrant laborer, which has also further implications for understanding how or what the extent of dependence of fishery-based livelihoods is on capture fisheries. Related to this, there are also ecological data gaps. We still have limited idea about the responses of fish species and fish communities to environmental change as well as fishing pressure. And this is particularly important if we look at the level of modification that our rivers have undergone because of dams, because of barrages, pollution, other forms of infrastructure development, and so on. At the same time, we don't know how different fish species which are still available to fish respond to fishing pressure. This brings us to an important policy issue, which is related to what is defined as legal and illegal fishing practice in fisheries. What are the outcomes of defining certain practices as legal or illegal in terms of their outcomes for sustainability and conservation? Some of these I have listed here. These are minimum mesh size restrictions, seasonal restrictions on catching certain sizes or species of fish, types of nets and gears to be used, or of course destructive fishing activities like dynamiting or poisoning of river channels. And I think some of these areas deserve our attention furthermore. And I am going to speak about minimum mesh size restrictions, which has been a very long idea that you always protect the small fry and you harvest the adults. Now, these minimum mesh size restrictions offer us a case in several policy contradictions. Now, policies typically are framed with multiple mandates or objectives in mind, which could be linked to rural nutrition, which is seen, for example, in the small indigenous freshwater fish or SIFs policies, which highlight the importance of small fish for rural nutrition, protein requirements, and rural livelihoods. Another aim is fisheries sustainability. How can we achieve stable catches and earnings and incomes for the people dependent on capture fisheries? This has also implications for species conservation. How do we protect fish species and other biodiversity or endangered species that is dependent on our rivers? What nets should be banned? What nets should be allowed? And so on. Now, interestingly, there are complex trade-offs involved in this. Small fish are mostly harvested in illegal nets. So then what do you do? How do you manage if you want to meet your objective of SIFs? For fisheries sustainability, you may need to have a mix of illegal and legal fishing gears. And I'll come to this in a bit. And for species conservation, it's often seen that even legal fishing nets lead to problems like bycatch or accidental entanglement of endangered species in fishing nets. These contradictions highlight the need for a paradigm shift in the way we frame harvesting rules and controls. And this is mainly because our fisheries are very complex. They are not the temperate single species, single stock fisheries. There are multiple species being harvested, multiple gears being used for hundreds of years, and species across different size classes being caught. And this is what brings me to make a case for what is a new and emerging, very exciting concept called balanced harvesting, where proponents of this concept have argued that to manage such fisheries, we need to move away from ideas of size selective fishing by catching fish across age classes in proportion to their natural abundances. And this is by recognizing that fishing has exactly the opposite impact as natural predation, because typically small fish tend to get predated, whereas in conventional fisheries management, we typically target the mature adults, which can lead to declines over time in the total stock of fish, because the fish producing the new recruits are themselves being harvested. Instead, under balanced harvesting, what is advocated is that you distribute fishing mortality, which is shown in the bottom graph, across the size spectrum of the fish population in question, which is also in proportion to their natural abundance. So you, in a way, mimic the impact of natural predation. You make fishing mimic that impact. And that may be a way to manage capture fisheries in the future. Similarly, we don't know about the extent of threats that fishing nets pose to riverine wildlife and endangered species. This is also an open area with several gaps in our knowledge and offers us opportunities for combined management of both for both fishery sustainability and for conservation of endangered species. So to sum up, basically this tells us that there are multiple gaps in the knowledge policy interfaces in terms of managing capture fisheries, but there is also a large scope for experimentation, adaptive management, embracing new ideas, and questioning old ideas such as, for example, minimum mesh size restrictions as being illegal everywhere. Similarly, there is a need to raise at a large scale, there is a need to raise the profile of capture fisheries as non-consumptive users of river water. There are also implications for the way we manage our water infrastructure, like dams or canals, to provide enough water in rivers for capture fisheries to flourish as a sector on which so many livelihoods depend. For this, I think the way forward is to have seasonal monitoring at multiple scales, whether it at the boat level or at the landing site level or at the level of large markets. This is maybe possible through distributed data collection across different departments, because fisheries, capture fisheries is a subject that definitely straddles fisheries, agriculture, animal husbandry, wildlife conservation, water pollution, navigation, and several other interlinked multi-objective facets of river management. And for this, I believe that citizen science initiatives to record capture fishery statistics, given that the sector is so scattered, may be a very interesting and innovative way forward to consider. That's all. With that, I conclude here, and I thank the organizers of the India Rivers Forum and the IRW 2021 for this opportunity once again, and all these people for their help and support. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Siddharth. So this was an interesting presentation on how livelihoods and the species, what are the different gaps and what are the shifts that happen with people, with the conservation. So next we move on to Dr. Archan Kanti Das, Dr. Das is the principal scientist with Central Inland Fisheries Research Institute, which is under ICAR, and he is the head of training and extension division there. Dr. Das, the floor is yours. You have 10 minutes to make the presentation.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible. Please.
Yeah, actually, I am on move. Since 4th November, I am on move. I am on wheel. I am now in Getalsut Reservoir on Subarna Rekha in Ranchi, where case culture, pen culture is on. So I will be narrating overall gamut of our riverine ecology, ecosystem, and biodiversity since last 30 years. I have been working in this sector right from Kaveri, Krishna, Godavari. I was the chief chemist. I was the chief chemist, and that I worked almost all the riverine systems in India. Being a limnochemist, I did my MSc in agricultural chemistry and soil science, and PhD in agricultural chemicals, and joined this agriculture research service system since 1993, and then I joined to ICAR, Central Inland Fisheries Research Institute, Barakpur, Kolkata, which the institute is 75 years old, established in 1947, 17th March, and we are totally devoted to that fisheries, inland open water fisheries system, including rivers, streams, rivulets, canals, and reservoirs of floodplains, wetlands, chor, mon, and we make our presence felt across India. The root point and root cause of this decline in riverine biodiversity as a whole, I would be narrating, I would be citing some few examples. For example, talking to River Ganges, that now we are handling NMCG, Namami Clean Ganga project, and very flamboyant project, and so far to rejuvenate the IMC, Indian Major Carp, Rohu, Cuttle and Niggle. So far, we released 42 lakhs of IMC fingerlings into the system of River Ganges, right from down Haridwar, that is Kannauj, to up to Belur, Howrah. That river ranching in its true sense, river ranching does not necessarily mean that simply taking and procuring fish fingerling from the local market and dumping it to the river. No, that genetic purity would be disturbed. What we have been doing, we have hired number of ponds across the river Ganges, and we are harvesting the brooders and nurtured them, and through hypophagization, from spawn to fry to fingerling, and we are putting it back beyond 10 gram size, beyond 100 ml size, so that they can evade the predatory pressure. Even out of 42 lakhs fingerling, this our history, the Gangetic system having 266 fish species that in inland, in freshwater sector, we are having more than 2,415 that fish species of 276 family. That out of that, from Gangetic systems, these SL, Hora, and those periods, we got 266. Then 12 year and 2012, it was reported 160. Now through NMCG, we reported and kept all the specimen in Barakpur, Kolkata, our headquarters, 190 species of different species of the Gangetic system. And here I have to mention to the august scientists and dignitaries that if we go back to 4 decades, particularly Bhagalpur and that zone, that we have been collecting 1100 ml of spawn. Now that has gone declined up to 2 ml. That spawn collections. So that here I have not to mention that why riverine fish is getting declined and all. We have our last year riverine system, and notice that exotics are getting, but here I mention few words that in river and Gangetic system, really underwater quality including having some two stresses of Kanpur and
I guess we have an issue with
it develops in the development of flora and fauna also, and from 26th of March 2020 onwards, because of lockdown, it has very positive impact on Gangetic and other riverine systems where dolphins are overflooded in our Barakpur area and all, and that freshwater dolphins. We are working on dolphin conservation also, besides conserving riverine fisheries across India. I've been working on River Kaveri, Krishna and Godavari also from Kaveri when I worked in 2000, 2001 and 2002, right from origin at Bhagamandala, Kaveri, Narmada, origin at Amarkantak and all, Trambakeshwar, and these Krishna, origin from your these above these Y and above these down to you're in near Pune, that from Kamandalu, and this river Krishna originates this from hillocks of this, and that water quality, riverine quality got increased, and a number of species we are regularly in touch with across India, including Brahmaputra and all. One team already working on River Siang, upper part of Brahmaputra, that water quality got increased. And though lot of demographic changes, lot of this human perturbation and a lot of pressures on filtrations, pollutions and all, these are all inbuilt components, but the number of sewage treatment plant is functioning and all Ganga water quality is increasing day by day. And here I have to mention that I was the chief chemist on Narmada river system right from origin to this Gulf of Thambe, that the Narmada water quality also increased at either side of the Narmada river basin, that under the leadership of our Honorable Prime Minister Sri Narendra Modi ji, that Narmada is very clean, and we injected to the middle of Narmada either side that this is Narmada Devi, Sureshwari Gange, Narmada Gange. So, and awareness campaign developed that you would not find any night soil, any polythene packet, any flower being dumped into the system, not nowhere, and immediate 5,000 rupees fine placard being put to either part of these Narmada basins, that where number of temples are there, Hindu deities are there. So, lot of development under NMCG, under different riverine projects, and with our interventions along with other organizations like the A3 SAP and all, where Jagdish Kumar Swamiji is working, excellent team. And here I have to mention that with a lot of industries got closed during this lockdown period last 1.5 years, and that directly has implications on the river and water quality development, flora fauna development. More species are being encountered, and pollution got declined, and pollution indicators, molluscans and all that got that increased, that water quality got developed across India, almost all the river systems, and all hope that we'll be maintaining this serenity across India, so that even in Kaveri system, I worked in 2000, 2002. Now, last year, our team from CIPRI also, they also conducted a survey right from Bhagamandala to down to Trichy Tanjavur, where Kaveri confluences with Bay of Bengal, that fish biodiversity, and I am regularly supporting with my earlier data, that number of exotics got increased, that the Thai Magur clarias, Garipinas got increased, even Paku, Pyorhectus, Brachypomas got increased, and other exotics. I think at present there are 28 to 30 exotics which would not have reported when I worked in River Kaveri in 2002, 2002. So increment in exotics beyond Chinese carp, that grass carp, common carp, and these silver carp, now brigade are available, that at T. Narasipur on River Kaveri, that more than 3 kilo, 4 kilo sizes of these your Thai Magur clarias, Garipinas are available. These are all great menace to the system, and number of pools are operating on River Kaveri. They are working well. The deep pools, we have to protect the deep pools through our NGOs functioning across India, and this message regularly I am mostly working more than 24 hours that a day to rejuvenate the riverine sector, to rejuvenate the reservoir fishery, to rejuvenate the floodplain wetland sector across India, that the riverine biodiversity could be managed. And number of forest departments, they are also supporting our activities day and night as to how to protect the fishes of river Ganga, whether it is Gangetic system, Brahmaputra system, Narmada basin, or Krishna Kaveri Godavari basin, that fish catch like dynamite.
Dr. Das, hello, Dr. Das.
Got label we are working at tender, and team also working. So anytime I will be available with your disposal for saving Indian fisheries, for saving the river sector of the ecological fisheries. Thank you all. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Das. I understand it must have been difficult for you to connect.
I'm traveling. I will be sending my report. I'll be sending my report as and when required, immediately after reaching Kolkata. Continuously, I'm traveling. So because the sector needs our service, that's why. Thank you.
Please stay for the session, because we may have questions for you later on. So maybe
I'll be replying to those after reaching the station. Okay. Okay. Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all. I'm not getting your call. That is it. Thank you.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much. So that was Dr. Das. A lot of his communication was not audible because of the data connectivity issue, but we will get him back. I mean, if you have any questions for him, you can put it on in the Q&A box, and we will reach him out. Next on the panel, we have Dr. Rameshwari from the Department of Life Sciences, Manipur University. And she has specialized in fish biology. Dr. Rameshwari, please take it from here.
Thank you. At the very onset, I would like to thank the organizers of Rivers Week, India Rivers Week 2021, and for giving me this opportunity, and also to Dr. Jagdish Krishnaswamy for inviting me to be one of the panelists in today's session. So with this, I would like to start my presentation. Yeah, I hope it's visible to all.
Yes, ma'am, it's visible.
Yeah. The capture fisheries and river ecosystems, and how do we collect data, and how do we advocate, like all these things are very different when we compare with the other parts of India and Northeast India, because the river itself, the river geostructure of the river is different here, and it's different in the plains of India. So I would like to first take into what are the things we are facing here. The context which Jagdish has established in the very beginning. Those 6 contexts I would like to discuss in this talk, like in relation to Northeast India. So here we can see some pictures which I have taken during my PhD, and as I continue my research in the area. So one is the Loktak Lake. We know that in Northeast India has myriads of water bodies, which comprises of lotic, lentic habitats. So we have a lot of lakes and beels and swamps, and on top of that we have different water bodies, as you say, rivers, starting from low latitude riverine structures to mid latitude, then high altitude. So these are the 3 components of rivers which are found in Northeast, especially low altitude, high altitude, and mid altitude. So accordingly, the diversity of fishes, ichthyofauna, and the riparian zone and everything differs according to the altitude. And as we can see here, but we know that when we talk of Northeast, since it is situated in the hotspot area, one of the freshwater biodiversity hotspot, people always come and talk about the beauty, the biodiversity, but what are we doing for that? Are we conserving, or are we trying to document as much as possible, or are we exploring? That is the question now. Like we know that there are a lot of problems. There is biodiversity loss, like starting at a very rapid, taking place at a very rapid pace. But how are we going to mitigate that, and how are we going to address that loss? That is the main thing which is of focusing in Northeast. The researchers and academicians are worried of that. Before, we are worried that even before we finish documentation or exploration of our, when we talk of native fish species, before even we document this, our reach biodiversity, at some point of time, it will become extinct. So that these are the worries we have in our minds. So here, in the next slide, we can see a lot of fishes. So some may take it as a like harvest, or some may take it as exploitation. When we talk in the conservationist point of view, this is overexploitation. And when we talk to a common fisher, when we talk in the perspective of a common fisher, then this is like a good harvest. So here comes the gap. Like the fishers here, they are illiterate, and when we talk of fisheries, capture fisheries, it's very different in Northeast. We don't have as such capture riverine fisheries or capture fisheries. We just have culture-based fisheries and sustenance fisheries, except in Assam, where there is the large rivers like Brahmaputra and the tributaries of Brahmaputra. But to other states, we just have hill stream rivers, hill streams, and so we don't have much of capture fisheries. So people, the fishers, what they do is sustenance fishery, and the farmers here, they are going for culture-based fisheries. So these are the differences which I have seen in other regions of India and Northeast. So, since there is a gap between the fishers and the conservationists, I mean, there is a lot of differences there. So when we talk of conservation, we cannot just talk of, we just cannot sit like we people are sitting here and we can discuss what can we do and this and that. That cannot happen in Northeast, as we have seen that there is diversity of fishes also, and there is diversity of ethnic groups. So as such, we have different languages, different barriers, then depending on the different terrains and different food habits, there is different things going on here. And in different locality, there is tribal laws. So in a river, if we go for a fishing, we cannot follow the same rule which we followed in a different river. So we have to go by the community river regulation, as to say. We don't follow in Northeast. I haven't seen this river regulation zone or anything which is implemented successfully. The only regulation which I have seen in most of the rivers of Northeast is the regulations met by the community, by the tribe, by the village head and the people. So that is the only regulation we have. So the gap should be met, like how we have to make them understand that how to bridge the gap between this overexploitation and whether it is a harvest. So that is also a main thing. That is also the main duty of us now here. Then another thing is here, we have also taken up a case study on Chakpi River. Chakpi River is a river in Manipur which drains into the Chinwin River. So Chakpi River actually is a very diverse river. I mean, like a lot of fishes are caught. Like since the beginning of there is high diversity, and we have, when we go for surveys and all, like so many multiple surveys has been conducted on the Chakpi River. And out of that, we find that around 70 species are there, and 22 belonging to 22 families and 30 genera. But there was a flash flood in 2015. So we can see how the climate change and the hydroecological balance, that imbalance is creating this problem. So after 2015 flood, the whole Chakpi River was flooded. And because of that, after that flood, we went for a survey for several times, and we found that there is diversity lost, especially in relation to fishes, and there was lost by around 40% in the same river. So we do not get the same species, we do not get the same families and the same genera. So this is only about the Chakpi River, but when we talk of wetlands in Manipur, especially, there are like around 22 wetlands before, distributed in the 7 districts. Especially Loktak is also one of the wetland. It comes under the Ramsar site. So we have conducted a lot of survey on the Loktak Lake also, which is around 25 hectare of land area. So what happened is that now the wetlands which was like there before, only the Loktak Lake and surrounding area is prevalent as of now in Manipur, and like 2 or 3 wetlands in the hill districts. The valley, the wetlands in the valleys, in the valley districts of Manipur, it's all gone. It's all, I mean, like it has been changed into like townships or other areas. Other people are residing there. So because of that, there comes the problem in the floodplains, and early in before 30 years before, there used to be ornamental fishes like Syncrossus butmori. Then we have this Crustallus bermanicus, which used to breed in this floodplains area, in this wetlands. But now, because since the wetlands is not there now, so there is loss of Syncrossus butmori and also Crustallus bermanicus from the wild. So we hardly get it nowadays. So those are the things we find. Then another thing is, the pollution is also one of the factor. This is a river, Sinalok River is in the Indo-Myanmar border. We went there after trekking for like 15 hours. So when we reach the area, it's so pristine, it's so undisturbed. We can see the clear waters. But this Nambul River, it is the only river which flows through the capital of Imphal, which is in the heart of Manipur. So what happens? We can see the pollution there. So the mistus used to be there in Nambul River. Actually, mistus ngase was described from our lab from this Nambul River. But now we hardly get mistus ngase from this river. So these are the things we can see. And another thing, when we see in Northeast, right, even the central government think that Northeast is the powerhouse of the country. So you can see the red dots. These are the hydroelectric power projects which the country is aiming to develop. But this should be done with proper EIA assessment, and also development has to take place. But there should be some, the project should be taken up thinking about the sustainability of the biodiversity in this area, especially the Northeast, which is very rich in biodiversity. So this is one of the things which we would like to recommend even to the government side, that while taking off developmental projects, they should think about more of a sustainable idea of how to make it work. So that is the thing. So when we talk of these dams and barrages, we can see in Manipur also a lot of projects are coming up. And this is one very important dams which is there. It's called the Ithai Barrage. Ithai Barrage, actually, it's located near the Loktak Lake. So what happens is that Loktak Lake used to have the Burmese ichthyofaunal component and also the Chinese component, like before 1980s. So what happened is that they used to come during the monsoon through a channel called Khordak in Manipur, and they used to come and breed in the Loktak Lake, and they go back usually after the monsoon. So these are the behavior of the fishes. But once the Ithai Barrage has been built, we even don't know whether a ladder is there or not, but still, after the dam has been built, so the Osteobrama belangeri, which is also the state fish of Manipur, which used to come from the Manipur River Basin, the system through this Khordak channel. Now we can't find it in wild in the Loktak Lake. We don't even find a single specimen of Osteobrama belangeri. So in case if we find a single specimen that may have come out from unmanaged culture fishery from nearby farms. So we get Osteobrama belangeri species only in the culture-based fisheries now in the farms. So those are the things which is there. So now people are aware of all this, decline in the biodiversity, and so people have started with like, so on the Wetlands Day, people have gone to ask for the decommission of Ithai barrages to the government of Manipur. So that was the thing. Then another thing, this was the question which was there. I mean, like the topics which was there. So we don't especially have explicit data on the spatial or the state of the river ecosystems of Northeast, especially the hilly states of Northeast, excepting Assam. Assam may be having some. Then the fish communities we have, there are 340 fish species, more than fish species in Northeast, and most of them are endemic, around 300 are endemic to the region. And fishers as such, as I have said, we don't have capture fisheries in Northeast. So what we have is like, they only go for either for as an enthusiast or as a sustenance fishery in the village. So that is the thing which is there. So we need to have a lot of, we need to collect data if we have to have a, explicit data for the whole country, that is there. And when we talk of scholarship and capacity in river ecology, as such, we don't have much in this part of the region. And when we talk of breeding and biology, even though we have a rich variety of fishes, we just take up the popular fishes which the farmers wanted, which fetch more, money in regard to that. So we have Osteobrama belangeri, then Bangana davdevi, then Neolucicalis stretchy, Lepidosiphalicus birdmori, then Clarius magur. And in ornamental fishes also, some attempts and trials has been taken up when it comes to Sistura and Gara. Gara mainly done by the Guwahati University, but we are also trying for that. So that is
Rameshwari, can I request you to summarize?
Yeah, sure. Then coming to the impacts issues. So we have said that we don't have the river regulation here. Then invasive alien species is also one of the very important factor, like introduced species. There are a lot of new introduced species, around 35 species of aquatic ornamental fishes are introduced. Then as food fishes, there are like even the fishery department, they have allowed like 19 species of fishes. And when we talk to the fishers, they don't even know the idea of whether they will become a friend or a foe in the future. So they just think about, maximizing the quantity of production. So that is the main problem. So they just think it as an opportunity, not knowing the consequences of it. Then these are some of the native species which face a lot of impact from the introduced species. First one is Clarius magur. Then this Cratucaloglanis paeja. It is found in the high altitude in Arunachal Pradesh. So Oncorhynchus mycis is one of the competitors of Cratucaloglanis paeja. Then, the projection is, we know the problem. The problem has been identified, so we need to intervene. But the problem is we are here in this second phase, that is intervention. So we don't even have the proper explicit data, and which will lead to biodiversity conservation and sustainability. So looking ahead, when we talk of the data collection, it needs to be done in a holistic manner where all these dependencies and resources and stakeholders should come together, like fish farmers, then anglers or aquaculture enthusiasts, governments, then researchers, academicians, and even from the conservationist side. And this is a complete example when the government come together with the public, what happens, what change can be brought. Before, this is a Nambul River before, and this is after the Save Nambul River campaign. The Nambul River became very clean, that is the thing. Then again here, after that, so many campaigns have started, Save the Taubal River, then no to sand mining to stop habitat degradation, then Save Hairok River campaign. These are all going on in Manipur as of now to conserve the river ecosystem. And even I work with the Anglers Association of Manipur, and where there is a Barak angling festival that we go for, awareness campaign, and we just let them understand the importance of the river and how to protect the river. And that's how, like the conservation, we can't use the mesh size policy which is there in the other major cities, but we can go for collecting fishes in different seasons. Like not collecting fishes during monsoon, and those are the things we tell the village communities and the village head so that they implement it. And some of them have implemented, and we could even see the increase in the diversity in a short span. And these are the awareness, like how we give awareness to the fishermen and to the villagers wherever we go for exploration. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Rameshwari. This was indeed a very important presentation because we anyways don't get to hear much about Northeast in the mainstream media. And now you please stay with us because we will take the questions regarding to this presentation at the end of the panel.
Okay, thank you.
So I invite next Ms. Parinita Dhandekar, who is well known for her research and writings, and she has been associated with Sender and very active on the advocacy field. Over to you, Ms. Parinita. We can't hear you. Are you on mute?
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
now you are.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, now it's okay.
Yes. Thank you so much for the introduction. Thank you for all the speakers and the organizers of this session. We heard some really fascinating presentations during the session. I would definitely like to thank Nachiket, Dr. A.K. Das, Dr. Rameshwari. Really a lot of stuff that I absolutely did not know. I would specifically like to thank Dr. A.K. Das because he was traveling, and even during his travels, he was trying to give us as much information as possible. I wish he had more time so that we could understand CIFRI's role much more. So I'm starting to share screen now. Yeah. Manu, is this visible?
Yes, it's quite visible. Please go ahead.
Okay. So, yeah. So thank you also to Dr. Krishnaswamy for setting out the context so succinctly and so well. Again, number of things that I did not know that I came to know through his presentation. So basically the fact remains, as we heard our past speakers also, though from Dr. A.K. Das's lecture, we did think that the condition of riverine fisheries in India is good and it's really increasing and flourishing, especially after the lockdown. I don't think he really meant that because the reality is absolutely different from that. And in this reality, we need to understand that while there are communities, there are scientific institutions, and there is a governance structure, the major problem that we have is that there is an absolute mismatch between all of the three. Governance in riverine fisheries, except in a few states like possibly West Bengal and Bihar, governance role in riverine capture fisheries, which are completely different than reservoir fisheries or aquaculture, is absolutely non-existent. And that is the premise on which we need to look at this sector. If you look at the number of people that this sector has, it is nearly 75% of all the fisheries population in India is actually working in inland fisheries. So we would think that as compared to marine fisheries, the participation of inland fisheries is so huge, but inland does not mean riverine. Inland did mean riverine for a very long time, but now inland definitely does not mean riverine. I sometimes think that there is more connection between riverine fisheries and marine fisheries, marine capture fisheries, than aquaculture and river. They are so distant from each other now. Even then, nearly 11 million people depend on inland fisheries. And, this is a session on data and science of riverine capture fisheries. And the problem is we do not even know what is the number of fisher folk And women, because this sector has a huge participation of women, how many women, how many families, how many fisher folk are actually involved in riverine fisheries? We have no numbers. Though we now have a new ministry for fisheries, we now have a new fisheries law of 2018, we do not have numbers even to understand how many fishers depend on our rivers and what is really happening with them. So the governance gaps in this sector are immense. And one of the major reasons behind the collapsing riverine fisheries in India is dams, barrages, and the resultant impacts of dams and barrages. I think this is all we know about this. This has been talked about in earlier sessions. All the experts have been telling us about this for a long time, that they are the single dams and barrages are the single biggest threats to global freshwater diversity, which is collapsing at rates which are much more alarming than any other biodiversity loss. They affect riverine fisheries in a number of ways. And when we say riverine fisheries, they affect riverine fisher folk in a number of ways also, which is a completely different story. Water abstraction, blockage to migration, loss of connectivity, change in seasonal cues due to hydropeaking. And in this hydropeaking, possibly India is next to China when you look at the extent of hydropeaking, which means the extent at which hydropower dams, which are supposed to be clean, green, and sustainable, release water to generate electricity. That is so huge that it completely washes away the fish fry. Loss of nutrients and introduction of exotics in the reservoirs. So if you look at most of the problems of the riverine fisheries sector in most of the country, definitely there are some exceptions, then we see that dams, barrages, embankments, abstractions, and infrastructure in the river has played a huge role, and the governance has completely turned a blind eye towards it. So we do not have a law for protecting flowing rivers in our country. It is absolutely legal to entirely dry out a river by building a dam on it. And we see this. This is not a conjuncture. We see this in even the estuaries of rivers like Kaveri, Pennar, Krishna. We see that the freshwater inflow into Sundarbans is reducing. Narmada, which Dr. A.K. Das so emphatically said that is a clean river after Prime Minister Narendra Modi's interventions. Actually, the Bhadbut barrage coming up right at the mouth of Narmada is playing a havoc with its Hilsa population. And when the Prime Minister went on to inaugurate or to lay the foundation stone for Bhadbut barrage, he was actually met with black flags by the fisherfolk of Hilsa, it is like the David and the Goliath. The Hilsa fishermen in Bhadbut Barrage in Bharuch are some of the poorest and the most marginalized sections of our society, and that is what is happening. As Nachiket said, capture fisheries is a state subject, and some states have fisheries acts. I have talked with fisheries department in Maharashtra, and they do not even know that rivers are under their purview. They think that they are supposed to manage and work on and seed and control and collect contracts for riverine reservoir fisheries. That is the sort of disconnect between the riverine fisheries and the governance that we have right now. The Wildlife Protection Act does not really protect true fish species, though it has some protection for Gangetic dolphin, Ganges shark, which is nearly extinct by now. But even with Gangetic dolphin, we see that these governance structures talk about protection, but when it actually comes to development projects affecting Gangetic dolphins, like Nachiket has worked on the inland waterways, then there is absolutely no presence of governance in protecting either these species, those rivers, or the people who depend on them. Hold on, sorry. If you look at, what is exactly the governance structure when it comes to dams and barrages and fisheries? So we have most of these large projects, type A projects require environment clearance from the Ministry of Environment and Forests. And for that, they look at the environment impact assessment, which is supposed to have a section on fisheries, just to make it clear the environment clearance is given by expert appraisal committee of the Ministry of Environment and Forests. This expert appraisal committee always has a representative from the Riverine Fisheries Institute, that is the Central Inland Fisheries Research Institute, CIFRI. They have always been a part of the expert appraisal committee of the MOEF, which sanctions dams which affect fisheries. Unfortunate to say that we have never seen these experts being at the place that they are make any difference to the decision making of dams, which have had devastating impacts on fisheries. I do have to say that CIFRI has been coming out with some of the best reports when it comes to impacts of dams on fisheries. It is because of CIFRI's reports and works that we know that fisheries in Ganga, Narmada, Kaveri, Godavari, Krishna have been collapsing, and the reasons are different impacts by dams. They may be obstruction to migration, they might be hypersalinity in the estuaries due to water not reaching, they might be, in case of Ganga, increasing sedimentation due to the barrages. It is because of the main CIFRI reports that we know it, but when the same institution plays a role in decision making around governance, their impact on governance has been nil. And that is definitely something that the governance needs to look at. We looked at the clearance rates of projects. As it is, the clearance rate of projects is such that there is zero rejection rate by the MOEF of these projects. Fish ladders are recommended very rarely. Out of 157 cases that we studied, only in 6 cases where fish ladders recommended. These were low barrages. So saying that fish ladders don't work is one thing, not experimenting on it at all, even for mini hydro projects and low barrages, is a different thing, which cannot be justified. We've not studied the impact of hydropeaking by hydropower dams on the fisheries population. We'll get to hydropeaking later. So these are some examples of how governance around dams has been looking at fisheries. Most of the EIS routinely provide false information on fish diversity. The new example, not the new example, but because Dr. Das talked about Narmada, I would really like to say this, that the NEERI EIA about Bhadbut Barrage on Narmada very strongly underestimated the number of underplayed or misled the number of people affected by Bhadbut Barrage fisheries on Narmada. EI report of Gundia HEP in the Western Ghats biological hotspot Netravati Basin in Dakshin Kannada, it said that there are no rare and endemic fishes in this river, when the specific spot is actually a hub of new fish discoveries. Same is the case with Athirapalli HEP, which is now supposedly shelved by Kerala. River Subansiri, which is one of the tributaries of Brahmaputra, with a only resident population of gangetic dolphins. The interim basin study of Subansiri did not even mention the presence of these dolphins. There are several such reports. Most of the EI reports underplay the presence of fish. The fish lists are copy-paste from different regions where the fish are just not found, severely underrepresented also. I would like to take it up from where Dr. Rameshwari left, that hydropower coming up in the northeast. So the picture of hydropower that we have in our mind, or that is being presented to us, is especially after the recent Glasgow climate talks, where coal is supposed to be the only villain of the game. And this means automatically that the focus will be on different sources of energy, one of which is large hydropower, which is definitely not clean, green, and sustainable if it is killing fish species, rivers, and forests and communities. For example, if you look at the Siang River Basin, which is the main stem of Brahmaputra, Siang, Dibang, and Lohit join to form Brahmaputra in Assam. But Siang, which flows from China to Arunachal Pradesh, has a number of dams planned on it. And if all of these planned dams are built, then the river downstream, or from the last HEP that is planned on Siang, will have a nearly 5,000 cumecs of discharge for 7 hours, and followed by about 178 cubics for rest of the time in one day. So this is highest of the flood discharge for 7 hours and lowest of the lean season discharge for rest of the day, every day in lean season. I talked about this with number of fish experts, also international fish experts, and they said that impacts of this kind really do not have a mitigation measure. There is no mitigation for this. But this has not been stated clearly by our, so fisheries do not really feature in our governance. That is what we need to really say out loud, that riverine fisheries do not feature in our riverine governance surrounding dams and barrages, despite the fact that so many people depend on it. This is the hydro peaking in Siam. This is the level of water that will change after hydro peaking in Siam, about 25 kilometers downstream of the large project.
Ms. Parinitha,
are we running out of time?
Yeah, we are running out of time.
Okay, I'll just try to wind up. This is about the no fish zones in Himachal Pradesh Fisheries Department. So Himachal Pradesh Fisheries Department comes up with no fish zones, and when hydropower projects are supposed to be planned on these no fish zones, the Fisheries Department gets compensation. So the compensation does not go either to the fish or to the communities, goes to the Fisheries Department. Ken-Betwa's EIA says that the Ken-Betwa link canal will actually provide a shortcut for fish migration into Yamuna. Only mitigation measures that is actually suggested by the EIAs and very happily sanctioned by the MOEF is to have fish hatcheries for all the dams possible. We've studied fish hatcheries. Our colleagues like Emmanuel Theophilus from Uttarakhand actually studied fish hatcheries. There's been no success stories in India where a dam company put up a fish hatchery and restocked the river. No success story. But there's been no post-facto evaluation either, and dams are being sanctioned one after other, only saying that fish hatcheries will be constructed. This is the publication that we've come out with on this. This is how dams have been sanctioned, what they actually suggested for fisheries. You can see seeding of reservoir, hatcheries, hatcheries, hatcheries. So this is mini HARRY projects and how they affect fisheries. I would again like to come back to SIFRI. Only because this is the only premier institute in India which is looking at inland fisheries, also CIFI, but SIFRI is really playing a big role. It is based in Barakpur, just very close to Faraka Barrage, which was completed in 1971, which completely destroyed fisheries, Hilsa fisheries in the river. They could not cross Faraka Barrage and come up when they actually used to migrate right till Allahabad to a point. This has really caused decimation of fisheries' livelihoods. SIFRI was just a few hundred kilometers away from Faraka Barrage, but from 1971 till now, till Namami Gange project, again talked about fish locks on Faraka Barrage. The barrage had no functioning fish lock or a fish passage for Hilsa migration. Very close to the premier institute, which is supposed to be looking at fisheries welfare and fisher folk welfare. So a lot of things that we need to talk about. This is the dams planned on the Upper Ganga, extremely fish-rich region. In Teesta Basin, again, angling in Teesta is this is Faraka Barrage, Pride of India, and that's the only lone Hilsa that the fisher people are catching. This is about Bhadbut Barrage, again, and this is how the Prime Minister was met by the fisher folk, because this is the last barrage, is like a last nail in the coffin of Narmada, because Narmada itself, the Sardar Sorovar projects themselves have caused so many of development in the upstream that Hoshangabad, which once actually gave away Mahasir fingerlings to the entire country, now gets Mahasir fingerlings from Tata Dams Lonavala in Pune. That is the reality of fisheries in Narmada. This is the fisheries protest in Bhadbut. A lot of things to say, but I would just wrap up by saying that governance has really failed riverine fisheries and fisher folk in India. I am right now in the United States, where Canada and United States have been trying to compensate the loss of fisheries income to the fishing communities. One of the biggest dam removals in the entire world, the Klamath Dam removal, will be started in the after some months, which is for Chinook salmon and for the Native Americans which dependent on Chinook salmon. What about our fishing communities who have lost of their livelihoods, their way of life, their villages, their settlements to these dams and were never compensated? What about the Hilsa fishermen who were just a few hundred kilometers from the premier fishing institution of India? What about the fishing population in Badbut Barat? What about the fishing population in Krishna and Godavari? Who is going to compensate them, or are they not important enough to be compensated? And is irrigation and hydropower the only means that we know of using a river? Again, a lot to talk about, but I'll just wrap up this section. And this is a community fish sanctuary in Meghalaya, and this is the keeper of the river. He actually protects the river from fishing, and this is how the river Simsang, which is also a free-flowing river in Meghalaya, has more than 10 such fish sanctuaries across its length. So thank you, and let us keep in mind that a sector where some of the most vulnerable people in India depend on the natural resources, which is supposed to be under community ownership, is actually entirely ungoverned in our country right now. And it is high time that we all come together. Scientists contribute in real time about the real issues and EIAs, and we come together as riverine communities of the nation. Thank you.
Thanks a lot, Ms. Parinita. It was very insightful presentation, especially since you covered so many issues, so many projects in such a short time, and gave us an overview of things. Next on the panel, we have Ms. Suman Jumani. Ms. Suman is currently pursuing her PhD from University of Florida, and she has worked on small hydro projects in Western Ghats, and also she is researching on river fragmentation. So over to you, Ms. Suman.
Thank you. Do you see my screen?
Yes, it's visible.
Okay. Yeah. So I'm very happy to be here today, and thank you to the organizers at India River Week. It's an honor to be here. So we all know that globally there's a proliferation of large dams across the world. And while in countries like the United States and Europe, they have started breaking down their dams to restore free-flowing rivers, we in the global south are really continuing head-on with our dam building spree. And, you know, despite all the research that has happened on large dams, their ecological, social impacts, and their impacts being so apparent, we still have ministers in our government who refuse to believe that these projects do cause harm and do need adequate consideration. In terms of data availability, right, the India WRIS portal is a good source of spatial distribution of these dams, be it hydropower, irrigation, flood control projects. However, there are other kinds of river infrastructure projects that pose as serious barriers, such as road culverts, embankments, navigation lifts, for which we don't have information on the spatial distribution. Another important sector that's really overlooked is that of small hydropower projects. So unlike large dams, which are very well defined in terms of, you know, their dam height or storage capacity, and all of them are cataloged in national and international registries, the situation is completely different for small dams. So these dams have no fixed definition. It varies from country to country, and there is no comprehensive registry that catalogs the presence of these projects. Most small dams are also run-of-the-river projects. And what I mean by that is, there's a weir that's built along the river, and water is diverted at the weir to a downstream powerhouse where it rotates turbines to produce electricity. So the water is then pumped back into the river. The consequence of this is that an entire river stretch between the weir and the powerhouse is left with very little or no flow, and that's what we call the dewatered stretch. So in India, we define small hydropower projects as those that produce just under 25 megawatts of power. And just to give you perspective on this, internationally, most countries set this limit at 5 to 10 megawatts. since they are called small projects, it's assumed that their impacts are also very small or very insignificant, and they're thought to be socially and economically feasible. So like the silver bullet, right? Because of this, in our country, we have very little regulation of the sector. So small dams do not fall under the ambit of the EIA notification. So they don't need a prior environmental clearance. They don't need to do EIA assessments, and there's no public hearing involved. On the other hand, because they are thought to be so great, they're offered a lot of financial incentives and subsidies from different levels, state and center, but also internationally through carbon credits. And as a consequence, we have thousands of small dams across the country, with about 6,500 more under consideration. So are these assumptions of these dams being so great really supported by scientific evidence? So we conducted a study to look at the ecological impacts of these dams in the Western Ghats, in the Netravati River Basin that Parinita mentioned some time ago. So the reason we chose this landscape is because it's an amazing biodiversity hotspot, but it's also a freshwater ecoregion having very high levels of species, freshwater species richness and endemism. But it's also a culturally diverse landscape. It's one of the most populated global biodiversity hotspots, and local communities here are very intricately tied to the river in terms of food security and livelihoods. So in the Netravati, we sampled 3 streams, 2 had small dams on them and 1 was undammed. And we looked at impacts on communities, on the river, as well as ancillary impacts. Because of lack of time, I'm only going to discuss our main findings, but you can find more information in our publications. We've published 2 papers. We also have a short film on this up on YouTube. So social impacts. One of the main outcomes of these small dams is loss of resource access, right? So these dams come up without any public hearing. So overnight, local communities lose access to parts of the river that they would regularly go to either wash clothes or fish or anything of that sort. A lot of people also told us that fish abundances and their fish catch had drastically declined since small dams came up. And though we were not able to verify this, many people said that that has forced younger people to start turning towards destructive fishing practices like poisoning and dynamiting to improve fish yields. There was also a particular village where people were arrested for protesting the construction of transmission lines on their land. And people from that same village lost access to a dirt road, which connected their village to the highway. Another important finding, and this was something that we did not expect, so this came about when we spoke to local communities in the area, was that they said human-elephant conflict in their landscape was a rare phenomenon, and it started only since small dams were constructed. So this seemed really strange, but we asked people to estimate and tell us when they thought conflict began. And as you can see, most people said conflict began between 2004 and 6. We then filed RTIs with the State Forest Department and looked at compensation claims filed by communities for human-elephant conflict reasons. And what we see is that the communities were absolutely right? So in the early 2000s, there was very little conflict. In 2005, we saw a sudden spurt. Similarly, we saw spurts in 2008 and 10 in compensation filed. And when we overlaid this with periods of dam construction in the landscape, there are 4 small dams, the overlap was just mind-blowing. So every time there was a small dam constructed in the landscape, it seemed like human-elephant conflict peaked. And this makes sense because in such hilly terrains, when you're constructing these projects, it involves blasting, hill cutting, movement of heavy machinery. And all of this forces elephants to move away from their natural movement paths and come in contact with local communities. When we looked at impacts on river, we considered a few variables. So not surprisingly, the dewatered river stretch, this is how it looks. What you're seeing there is the weir wall. So below that, the stream width and depth of water was highly reduced. And because there was such little water, the water quality was very badly affected. So the water was much warmer and it had lower levels of dissolved oxygen. And not surprisingly, that affected the huge diversity of fish communities that we have here, right? So we found that in dammed streams, fish richness was much lower, fish diversity was much lower. Even within dammed streams, closer to the dam, fish richness was much lower. And as we moved away from the dam, we could see some level of recovery, fish species richness started increasing. What was more worrying was we saw entire shifts in community composition. So while the undammed stream had a lot of species specialists in their dominant species, right? So you have species like marseed, which need to migrate long distances to breed, or beryllius, which need free-flowing oxygenated waters. Those species, their abundances dropped, and instead we saw a dominance of these generalist species like Divario aquipinatus, which can tolerate a range of disturbances. And all of these impacts were most pronounced in the dewatered section. In terms of ancillary impacts, so often when we think of these small dams, we think, oh, it's just a little wall along the river. But no, there are a lot of ancillary structures that need to be constructed, like access road, penstock pipes, transmission lines. So there's also this other side to small dams, which is, especially when they occur in natural landscapes, they cause severe linear fragmentation around their vicinity. And because these dams have very little scrutiny, even if they exceed the forest clearance they are granted, nobody knows and nobody is taking any action. So our findings really supported what the international scientific community was saying, which is that at the scale of per unit power generated, the impacts from small dams are as severe, if not more severe, than large dams. And so knowing this, we can imagine the consequences of ignoring this sector, right? And now, like I said, we don't have spatial information on the distribution of these small dams. So I just want to illustrate what that means. So in the state of Karnataka, these are the dams that are listed on the CWC portal. Again, we filed RTIs with the relevant authority. And after months of cleaning the data, we got the data in a very, very bad shape. We were able to map existing small dams. So you can see there's already quite a difference. But we were also able to find the locations of all proposed small dams that are under consideration. And so the difference between panel 1 and panel 3 is huge. So if we are thinking about using science to try and study our rivers, their status now and conservation and development, having the complete picture is very important. And even this is not the complete picture because a lot of minor irrigation projects, a lot of like road culverts, these are not even included. And again, we see that not surprisingly, these dams overlap with regions of high natural cover and high freshwater fish diversity. At a national scale, if we look at it, we know that a lot of these dams fall within the Western Ghats and the Himalayas, both of which are ecologically critical landscapes, but they're also supporting a lot of local communities that rely on the rivers and the ecosystem services they provide, right? And so this limitation in data availability and accessibility, so even if the data is available, if we can't access the data effectively, it leads to ineffective, unscientific basin-wide management. So one thing we've been trying to do is study riverine connectivity in data deficit regions like India. And we'll use Netravati as a case study. Because again, here we know where we have existing dams and where we have proposed dams. So we've developed an index to measure river fragmentation. And the utilities of that are, one is we can look at how fragmentation changes over time. So what we see here is like a chrono sequence of fragmentation, right? So up until this red line is the existing dams. And we see that if all proposed dams are built, basin-wide fragmentation increases about 5 times. Another thing to look at it is through these spatial scales. So we can see that in the existing scenario with existing dams, the Bisle-Kumaradhara region is very well connected. And if you study the fish there, it's reflected in their fish population. But in the proposed scenario, it gets severely fragmented and we can expect to see drastic declines there.
Ms. Suman,
apart from these descriptive,
Ms. Suman, can I request you to summarize?
Yes. Apart from this, we can also use this information for conservation and development planning. So we can assess all the proposed dams to try and find out those which are which cause least impact to the environment, but also produce the highest benefit, right? So for instance, dams which have very low hydropower capacity, but a very high fragmentation index are a really bad idea. We don't want to build them because they're a lose-lose scenario. And again, this is just illustrative proof of concept. Ideally, when we do this in the real world, we're going to look at not just connectivity, but flow regulation, biodiversity, a whole bunch of other factors. In an attempt to make data on rivers and waters more accessible to people, and all of you guys who are doing such great work on rivers, my colleague Pradeep Kolgi has put in this enormous effort. He and I have worked together to create this Google Earth Engine application that provides users with a time series of surface water area for India. So anybody can access this URL, and you can look at a time series of how surface water changes in any basin or at a transit level. We are going to launch this officially in a couple of weeks, so please look out for it. And we will enable a data download feature as well, so users can actually download and use this data. So I'd like to end there. Thank you so much.
Thanks a lot, Ms. Suman, for this excellent presentation, because of course there's this problem with small projects that they are exempted from certain regulations and then go on damaging the ecology. So now we come to the Q&A part of the session. If there are any questions, you can put them on the Q&A box. And I guess Ms. Parinita has to leave early. So I will, Ms. Parinita, I just have a question for you. When we talk about fishery rights, we talk about communities, traditionally they have been fishing at certain rivers, certain parts of the rivers. Now, when we talk about, do you have any examples where people have been able to campaign to protect their rights? And are there any examples under Forest Rights Act? Because that legislation also provides the provision that forest dwellers can claim their traditional fishing rights of the area. So are there any examples you have come across on that?
Yeah, thank you so much, Manu. Well, there are no, see, again, we have to understand that fishing communities, except in states like Bihar and West Bengal, and to some extent Assam, fishing communities are very dispersed, and they are some of the most disenfranchised section of our society. So it's very difficult for them to get organized and put forth their issues. Having said that, I've seen Tawa and Bargi in the Narmada Basin have shown us the way when it comes to getting fishing contracts in the reservoir for the fisher people and not the contractors from outside in urban areas. When you compare this with rivers like Penaganga in Maharashtra, that river actually had a flourishing fisheries population, and when the lower Penaganga, when the dam came up, the actual the contracts for the fisheries were given to contractors in Nagpur, completely alienating the local fishing communities from there. But so Tawa and Bargi is one example. Wainaganga, again in Vidarbha in Maharashtra, the fishing communities have shown tremendous initiative and agency in getting fishing rights from the reservoir. From the FRA point of view, I don't think of large examples. Those smaller examples do exist. So, but the light of real positivity is the fish sanctuaries, and Suman has also worked on it, and it's a really fascinating part of Indian fisheries management. When from Uttarakhand to Bihar to Maharashtra, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, and Orissa, and places in Northeast, the community fishing sanctuaries, they are there for, some of them are there for religious reasons, but most of them are there for conservation reasons. Very fantastic and a holistic ecosystem conservation ethic by the community and not by the funding agencies, so to say. And India is really dotted with these community fish sanctuaries, which protect fantastic number and parts. So, and what I'm always fascinated with is when it comes to the communities, they don't protect fish in situ. It's not like hatcheries or seeding or ranching. It's always protection of the river along with the fish. And so, fisher people are the real, the real flag holders for a healthy river. So if you have healthy fishing communities, you have a healthy river. So I guess, that's how we should be looking at river fisher folk as the champions of healthy rivers in India.
Right. Thanks a lot. If there is any other closing you want to make before you leave, you can make that.
No, that's about it. I was just really very fascinated listening to all the presentations. I hope Dr. Ikedas also gets some time to complete what he's been saying, because that's also the interlinking of rivers and the impact of fisheries on that is. So the only appeal that I would like to make is to students and to scientists that please, we have number of new fish discoveries happening throughout the country, and that is definitely very, it's very invigorating, it's very affirming kind of news. But we also need more studies in the real time. We need studies on environmental flows, because e-flows are the way fisheries are being justified in dams. We need studies on e-flows, we need studies on hatcheries, we need studies on dependence of people on riverine fisheries, we need studies on the fascinating goods and services which free-flowing rivers provide. So there is a lot to do, and I really appeal to the scientific community to engage not only with papers and academia, but the real-time issues, to help out the civil society organizations, to help out the communities, and to really build a vibrant picture. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Dr. Rameshwari, there's a question I had regarding, since you have an experience in fish biology, can you tell us about, there's a lot of news, there's a lot of research going on DNA barcoding of fish. So how does that help with when it comes to tackling the issue of invasive or alien species? Does DNA barcoding kind of is part of the solution to that?
Yeah, we can go for DNA barcoding, but DNA barcoding is just for as a tool. It is just a tool for identification. If we are very clear with the morphological, we need to go for an integrated approach, as to say we need to go for morphological identification along with DNA barcoding. But the real time problem in Northeast is that people are not even aware of what are alien species as such. Like, they only think that, okay, this is brought from other places of India, so we can rear it and we can do all sorts of activities with it, and we can quantify it, we can fetch money from it. That is the only thing. So barcoding is the kind of tools for identification. So the main for going for the solving the problem management of invasive alien species or alien species, this first we need to is awareness, not DNA barcoding, just to jump to DNA barcoding, because DNA barcoding is meant for only the scientists who knows the technology and the science. So to the layman, they don't know what is DNA barcode. So the first thing is to make them aware what is an introduced species and how they become alien when they are introduced into an ecology, into the river, into the natural water. So when do they become alien, invasive? Those are the things that is the first priority that should be, made people to be aware of first. Yeah, of course. Then after that, it will the integrated taxonomy will come into play. So the first thing is that, from my opinion.
And are there any examples in India or any part of the world where people have kind of adapted to the invasive or alien species?
Adapted?
Yeah.
As such. Like in Northeast, there was this question of introduced species. It wasn't there before, but since they are found in the wild waters now, like recently we went for a field trip to one of the rivers in Manipur. It's in a hills district. Then what happens is that the river was found to be mainly infested with goldfish instead of the endemics. So it's like we can see, and we know that these introduced species are prolific breeders and they can survive in all sorts of environments. So they become adapted, and that's how they impact the habitat, and that's how they compete with the native species. And so the native species numbers are on decline, especially in Northeast also. And we can even see in recent years, in 2020 itself, we found the Amazonian sucker catfish in the wild waters of Manipur. So this is also another important issue now. because before in Northeast, there wasn't there was very less people who are aquaculture enthusiasts, or you can say aquarium enthusiasts. There was very less ornamental trade, as to say, in Northeast. But after, like, people get exposure before, you know, that it is a very confined community in Northeast, so they're not even exposed to like aquarium keeping. So later on now, as such, people are more interested into aquarium keeping and keeping fishes as a hobby. And after that, so many outlets came into the market, and because of that, many are illegally brought to the state or to the region. And as such, after, they don't even know the size, how much an Amazonian catfish will grow. And as such, when they are juveniles, they are kept in the aquaria. And when it grows, it becomes oversized. They just let it into the ponds or in the farms. They don't even know the consequence of that. And as such, they escaped into the natural water. So this is how the problem of invasive species is taking place in Northeast, actually.
Right. Thanks a lot. There's a question that has come in from Ms. Janki Andharia. She asked, what are some of the specific policy recommendations, and how should the forum proceed? Is creation of river regulation zone a valuable option? Any of the panelists can take it up. It's, I guess, about river regulation zone, and as a forum, how do we kind of are going to deal with it? Dr. Jagdish, would you like to take it up, or anyone else?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yes, yes. Sir.
Yeah. So just like we have, the coastal zone regulation policies, and of course they have been being amended, and there are issues related to that. We definitely need at least the start of a policy that can conserve the lateral connectivity, all the 4 types of connectivities that was mentioned by Suresh in a previous session. That in a floodplain connectivity, which the equivalent of the coastal zone regulation needs to be brought in for streams and rivers. And I think it's going to be a very big challenge because of how even the mapping of floodplains across the country, the data and information on that, because floodplains are very dynamic over time. So, some floodplains, get some parts of certain floodplains get flooded only once in 5 or 6 years or 7 years and so on. So you need to use long-term information and knowledge in order to define the floodplain in a proper way. And I think that should be the start for defining the conservation zone for rivers. If we are really committed as a country to conserving our rivers, including the Ganga and all other rivers, we must be now raising this issue of conservation zone, which includes the floodplain and all the wetlands, and as well as the rivers, the main river itself. So I must say that this is a big gap in both the information and data. And it provides us, we really need to move fast if we have to do some advocacy for coming up with new legal framework for the protection and conservation of the entire river ecosystem, which includes the floodplain as well.
Right, sir. Ms. Suman, you have also you have researched on the river fragmentation. What are the parameters? And I saw one of your papers talking about how the parameters might not be, but the parameters have been used may not be sufficient. Can you tell us a bit about that? What does that mean, and where does fisheries come in there?
Yeah, thank you, Manu. So I think, like people have mentioned in the past 2 sessions, the concept of river continuity and fragmentation is really complicated, because rivers are these connected ecosystems, right? So even if you put a dam upstream, the impacts of that are going to propagate all the way downstream. So it's not just about it affecting the environment around the dam or the communities living there. It also has impacts all the way down to the estuary and the fishing communities there, because it affects the health of the fisheries there as well. So like, again, Dr. Jagdish mentioned earlier today, most of our focus has been on terrestrial systems. We study fragmentation in terrestrial systems. All our protected areas are focused on terrestrial biodiversity, but we've really overlooked our freshwater systems. So trying to get the science to catch up, come up to speed, and really implementing that science in places like India, where we have very little data available, so we have to rely on things like these kind of metrics, is very important. And what we've been trying to do is develop certain metrics of connectivity or fragmentation, come down to the field and see whether those metrics are predicting fish health. So if those metrics are predicting, then it means they are, in some sense, we are on the right track, right? And now what we want to do as a next step is plug in these metrics along with a whole bunch of other metrics to identify these important zones. So it's impossible for us to just protect the catchment of an entire river. So just finding key zones where if we invest our conservation effort, if we were to protect them, we could, conserve the ecosystem services of the basin to a larger extent, is where the science needs to be going. And that's where we are trying to head. There's another thing we've been trying to do is really rope in people from the policy sector into our project right from the get-go, so that, it's not just about us doing the science and then giving the results to people and then our job is done, but rather have them at the table when we are designing things, when we are conducting the analysis, so that it's more implementable. So in that sense, I'm using this platform as an opportunity as well to see if there's any person from either the government or, even EAC committees who would like to be involved. We are looking for collaborators.
Thanks a lot, Ms. Suman, and all the best for your work. And I hope more people will join in after this session. Now I think we will wrap up. I will just invite Mr. Siddharth Agarwal to inform us about the next session we are going to have.
Thank you, Manu. Thank you all panelists. Thank you all for attending today's session. I would just like to take this opportunity to share with you the upcoming session, that is session 4 of India Rivers Week 2021. Over the first 3 sessions, we've talked about the challenges because of river pollution, because of river fragmentation. Today, we talked about whether do we have enough data to actually deal with the kind of problems we're talking about, and what is the challenge that we see in getting to the kind of data that we need. The next session, session 4, will look at the changing political economy. A lot has been said in regards to whether the fishing communities are fragmented, whether they have a voice or not. So we will try to bring forth some of the community voices in the next session, some researchers and activists who have worked over the years with communities to bring out these smaller nuances, to bring forth these challenges that riverine fisheries, especially capture fisheries, face. So do join us on 20th November. It starts at 4 p.m. Indian Standard Time. And thank you again for coming to today's session. If there are any final comments from any of the panelists, please feel free to take any final comments from the panelists?
Yeah, through this platform, I have like heard on the Parinita, then Suman, they're all working on dams and prospects which are there in Northeast. So I would like all of them to also work more in Northeast area, because a lot has not been done in this area as compared to other major cities or places of India. So comparatively, we need to do a lot, because here the biodiversity is rich and we have like a lot of rivers. So I would request everyone who's working in this field to, come to Northeast and we can work together for conservation and sustainable utilization of the resources found in the region. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr.
That
Rameshwari.
sounds great, Rameshwari.
Yeah.
Hope to do that someday.